Chapter 17, An Industrial Giant. When the Civil War began, the United States was way behind in terms of industry and manufacturing. And by the time we get to like 1875, American manufacturing is thriving. And in fact, the world had never seen such remarkable rapid economic growth. The value of American manufactured products rose from 1.8 billion in 1859 to over 13 billion in just 40 years. So this chapter looks at the process of America becoming an industrial giant. Essentials to industrial growth. So by the very end of the 1800s, American manufacturing was flourishing. And partly this was because of the new natural resources that were discovered and exploited, which created opportunities that attracted the brightest and most energetic Americans. And as the national market grew, it was protected by foreign competition because of tariffs, because the government placed tariffs on things coming in from other countries. So our products were protected because of that. We weren't outdone by cheap foreign goods, sadly, which is no longer the case. And on top of that, we had foreign capital or foreign money entering our market freely as Europeans and people from all over the world were buying our goods. So in order to make up for the gap in labor, European immigrants continued to come in and provide that additional labor needed for industrial expansion. And on top of that, advances in science and technology led to new machines and power sources being created and founded, which also increased productivity. And just to throw out some of the important products of this time or industries of this time, packaged cereal became really popular. Canned food became really popular. And the marketing plan for that was just to convince middle-class women that their lives would be easier if they bought things like canned goods and cereal. They wouldn't have to wake up, at 4:30 in the morning to get dinner ready for their husband who had to go to work. The Bonsack machine made cigarette rolling really fast. Unfortunately, that habit was not good, and cigarette smoking became really popular, especially among northern factory workers. Also, the typewriter was perfected by Remington Company. George Eastman created an efficient and simple Kodak camera. So these were just some of the products that Americans really grabbed a hold of and that became really popular. Railroads. So railroads were the first big business, and toward the end of the 19th century, railroads became the most significant element in American economic development. One, because they were super important as an industry themselves, but also because they contributed to the growth and development of almost every other industry. And other industries relied on the railroads in order to ship their goods. So railroads developed into larger and more integrated systems. And you've got Cornelius Vanderbilt in the north, particularly in New York, building railroads, and then Jay Gould in the southwest building railroads. And they became the most powerful, wealthiest people in the country. One of the things that they did to make railroad transportation easier was to standardize equipment and to come up with time zones. It was important with railroad cars traveling in different directions to be on the same clock. This would prevent wrecks when changing over the lines. So new railroad technology, especially the air brake, which was created by George Westinghouse, allowed the railway engineer to apply brakes to all cars simultaneously. And basically this made it possible to greatly increase the size of trains and to increase the size at which they could safely operate. George Pullman invented the Pullman sleeping car, And so if you wanted to travel overnight from east to west, you could do so and sleep on the train on your way. So railroads were really the first big business. Iron, oil, and electricity. So the transformation of iron manufacturing affected the U.S. almost as much as the development of the railroads. And this was really because of the Bessemer process, which made it possible to mass produce steel at a relatively efficient cost. And so the huge supply of iron ore and coal in the U.S. allowed for the rapid growth of steel production. You've got the Mesabi Range, which had enormous amounts of iron. Pittsburgh, of course, surrounded by its vast coal deposits, became the steel center and the iron center of the country, hence Pittsburgh Steelers. The petroleum industry expanded even more than iron and steel did, and new refining techniques allowed refiners to produce kerosene, which was great until the development of the gasoline engine, and then that became the most important petroleum product. So the growth of urban society and the increasing technological advances that were taking place led to the creation of even newer industries like the telephone and the electric light business. Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone in 1876, and his invention very quickly proved its value. And of all of Edison's many inventions, of course, the incandescent light bulb was the most profitable and probably the most practical. The Edison Illuminating Company opened up a power station in New York, and shortly thereafter, power stations began to appear everywhere. And so the substitution of electricity for steam power in factories had an impact almost like the replacement of water power by steam power before the Civil War. Competition and monopoly. Looking first at the railroads. The growing importance of expensive machinery and economies of large scale led to economic concentration. And the deflationary pressures after 1873 eventually led to falling prices and increased competition, which really cut deeply into railroad profits. Railroads hoped to increase their volume of shipping, and in order to do that, they gave away rebates and drawbacks and all kinds of discounts to certain customers. And sometimes the discounts were really large, and so in order to make up for their losses, they would charge higher rates in areas where there was no competition. And so the combination of lost revenue from rate cutting and inflated debts forced several railroads out of business in the 1870s. And in the 1880s, the major railroads responded to those pressures by creating interregional systems. And the interregional railroad systems did continue to thrive. So the steel monopoly. The iron and steel industry were also intensely competitive, and production continued to increase, but demand really varied, sort of erratically, depending on large projects that were being carried out in large cities. And so Andrew Carnegie used his talents as an administrator and a salesman, along with his belief in technological improvements, to create the Carnegie Steel Company. And this business came to dominate the steel industry. And alarmed by Carnegie's control of the industry, makers of finished steel products considered combining their resources and actually making steel themselves. In response, Carnegie threatened to turn out finished products as well and cut them out of the market. And so J.P. Morgan was actually the one who averted a steel war by buying out Carnegie for a massive sum of money. And Carnegie was his main competitor. and the main fabricators of the finished steel products. So after JP Morgan bought it out, the new combination United States Steel became the first billion-dollar corporation, and Carnegie retired so wealthy and devoted the rest of his life to philanthropy. So the oil industry. We all know Rockefeller is the name for this one. He's our oil guy. And there was intense competition among refiners in the oil industry as well. And it led to a monopoly in the petroleum industry. And of course, it was John D. Rockefeller that founded Standard Oil Company in 1870 and began to buy up smaller oil companies. He used technological advances and employed both fair and unfair means to destroy his competition, or to persuade them to join forces with him. But by 1879, Rockefeller controlled 90% of the nation's oil refining capacity. And to maintain his monopoly, Rockefeller developed a new type of business organization, the trust. A trust is just a relationship where property is held by one party for the benefit of another. So a trust is created by a settlor who transfers the property to a trustee, and the trustee basically holds that property for the trust's beneficiaries. So it's a monopoly that doesn't look as much like a monopoly. Retailing and utilities. So utilities such as the telephone, electric lighting industries also form monopolies, and they did that in order to prevent costly duplication of equipment and to protect their patents. And both Bell and Edison fought lengthy and expensive court battles to defend their inventions from imitators and competitors. Competition between General Electric Company and Westinghouse pretty much dominated the electric lighting industry. The life insurance business actually expanded after the Civil War as well, and that too even became dominated by a few large companies. In retailing, this period saw the emergence of urban department stores like Marshall Field and Wanamaker's. The department stores advertised heavily, and they stressed low prices and efficient service, and of course they guaranteed their products. But in pretty much every way, for Americans, this was the age of industry and big business. And when we pick up tomorrow, we'll be looking at American response to big business.